Welcome to my channel, The Magic of Java. This is an extract from my second book, The Magic Sugar from Java. It's a novel. It reflects my experience of falling in love with Indonesia and falling in love with an Indonesian lady and slowly recognising that she has been taken from me either through black magic or simple criminality. Or is it simply my descent into madness? Whatever, it's still a novel. Any resemblance to real people is unintentional. But of course it's based on my experience. And yes, it's based on people I know. But amalgamations or caricatures of them. I do mention real celebrities and hope they will forgive me, along with any of my family and friends who believe that they have identified themselves. The Saint of Puger. It was nearly midnight when we arrived at Pak RT's sister's home, significantly longer than Google Maps had estimated, and as long as my favourite southern route should have taken. I was a little perturbed when I was allocated a bedroom to myself and Maddie was to sleep outside with Titi. Yes, the family are devout Muslims, but splitting a man from his wife seemed nonsensical. Nevertheless, it was a nice house, a little like those in Gunung, but finished with lovely teak furnishings that Pak RT's brother-in-law made. In fact, all houses in the area were like this, reflecting the relatively good agricultural land and high proportion of the region's young people sending remittances from Malaysia, Saudi Arabia and the Gulf. No sooner had I fallen asleep and the Adhan's call rang out. I took wudu and I went to the masjid next door, which was huge, being paid for by the UAE. In this corner of Java, there appears to be a masjid for every 20 households, mostly large enough to accommodate 400 worshippers. After prayers, we all shook hands, and in the mashola, and the friendly, but not entirely competent imam asked who I was. Bullets are not unknown in Banyuwangi, as this is where tourists from Bali catch the bus to Mount Bromo, near Malang. But I very much doubt if a Bule had ever visited this masjid in this small desa near Jember, although I had once met a full-on Muslim convert from Bolton in the lounge at Abu Dhabi Airport who lived with his Javanese wife in Banyuwangi. No sooner had Pak RT busied himself with calling relatives and Sufi holy men, arranging for a respected Pak Ustad to visit us later in that day. I was amazed when this respected Pak Ustad was the imam from the masjid next door. Surely we hadn't travelled the length of Java to see him. Nevertheless, Pak Ustad appeared relatively competent in this task, repeating many of the actions that I had learned to remove malevolence from Maddie's back, but with more precision and finesse. He did so with considerable humour, which eased an extremely tense situation. He next assisted Titi and finally me. I could feel little happening, but assumed that I was fairly clean, having already been helped by the imam from my local mashola. Pak Ustad then confirmed my feelings that Titi was picking up on her mother's anguish, and there was not much to worry about. He felt that I was strong, which I certainly have felt since the imam from my local mashola had assisted me, and I could withstand the onslaught. He was, however, much more concerned about Maddie, despite making light of it, not wanting to concern anyone. The 4 red marks on Maddie's chests were needles which kept being twisted, causing her pain and to cough up blood, as presumably were all our red marks, including my measles from my own now troublesome multiple marks. I suspect that this is done with Besikumin Kunat, on sale at any Dukun supplier, but kept in the toilet and pushed into effigies of my family and I, like a voodoo doll. Pak RT bought Maddie some Yunnan Bayou tablets to stop this bleeding, which Widati had taken following the accident which deformed her leg. Then Pak Ustad said that Pak RT was madly in love with Maddie. Had Maddie not noticed Pak RT wearing putri doyong air matter? When Pak RT tapped Maddie 3 times, he had placed a packet of spells from Semar Messen inside her. And from them, magicians, people learn that that through that which they cause separation between a person and his spouse, but could not harm anyone except by Allah's leave. And now they learn that which harms them rather than profits them. And indeed they knew that its practitioners would have no share in the hereafter. And how bad indeed was that for which they sold their own selves if they but knew. Al-Quran 2:102-3. With the Semar packet, most people would lose their minds immediately and immediately fall in love with the perpetrator, but Maddie was strong and already had Semar Messen within her, which had been placed there as a child by her nanny. Pak Ustad could probably remove the packet, but if Pak RT was ever to do this again, Maddie would lose her mind, as she could never fall in love with such an inadequate man. Worse still, someone had used the most powerful of love spells, Jaran Gorang. This takes away all physical sensations and completely wipes the mind, leaving only a picture of the perpetrator in one's head. It takes 40 days of fasting for this spell to work, and presumably a lot of money paid to a Dukun Santet. The 40th night probably coincided with Maddie's loss of sensation in Gurun. Almost certainly not coincidentally, Jaran Gorang by Nella Charisma was a popular song in Indonesia at the time and further afield. Our enemies were able to keep sending such spells to Maddie wherever she is, even in Manchester, via electronic connections such as her mobile phone number or email address. The implication being that to rid ourselves of black magic, we needed to create a completely new life, moving from our home and changing our phone numbers and email address. In doing so, losing so many of our friends, family and contacts. A perfect recipe for creating total panic and paranoia. In fact, reminiscent of what my former partner had done to control me so many years ago. But this was not complete news to us. A note sent to Banyumas contained a number which Mass Predictor assumed was a mobile number, and Maddie had received a number of calls after Pak RT had visited a Dukun, but nobody ever spoke. We loved how Pak Ustad had made a joke of everything, almost like it was one big game to him, but felt concerned that he had not removed all from Maddie, despite promising to try again in 2 days. I was relieved that I could withstand the pressure, and felt calm, even serene in Jember. Pak Anggabaya visited his guru, who knew our Pak Ustad well, and assured Pak Anggabaya that we were in good hands, and sent numerous Jumat, Wafak, black salt and medicines for us, including a special sugar that we were to take a small amount of each day. He also exchanged the rings which he had given to Maddie and I for new ones which had been more recently blessed. I walked around the Desa, which, if I am honest, I found a little boring compared with our mountain home in Gunung Kidul. Jember was flat, with lanes straight, and the large masjids all looked the same. True to form, Maddie had discovered the local shopping mall, which was really a discount store and a food court. But I rather liked it, buying myself a cheap boutique. Actually, it was a songket, the material favoured in Indonesia's remoter regions. Later we ate in the food court, where I enjoyed a baby octopus satay. That second afternoon, another brother-in-law of Pak Anggabaya's visited us, and insisted we visit a Dukun in Puger, yet another coastal desa where near Orokidal is said to reside. The brother-in-law had a cheeky face, and I assured that he was every bit as naughty as he looked, reminding me of the Liverpudlian actor Stephen Graham. Later, when we visited his somewhat opulent home, we found that he was the manager of a local Crispies factory, maybe the owner, and in his garden he showed me his prize-winning goat, the size of a small cow. When released, this goat seemed to attack Pa Angabaya, who had been stroking this colossus in its cage, as I recall a great big billy goat doing to the troll before going cloppity-clop over the rickety bridge. The brother-in-law later told us that Suharto's son-in-law had a similar goat, which he also shows. Despite being something of a tourist attraction, Puger is really a scruffy fishing village, in which we bought 2 kilos of enormous prawns for $7. The Dukun's house was down a few gangs, with a strong smell of ozone. In fact, the area was not unlike a Cornish fishing village, but without the gentrified steep lanes. When we entered it, it was like going into any scruffy office in Indonesia, often favoured by Indonesia's super rich to avoid superstition from tax collectors. The Dukun Santet asked few questions and offered no explanations, not what we were used to at all. I call him a Dukun, and I'm sure this is correct, despite being told that he was a holy man and he had spent some time in Saudi Arabia. He simply picked a siri leaf from his garden, and he asked someone to hold it on Made's back. Made felt that she felt very hot where the leaf was, and he encouraged us to keep the leaf in place, which we did for around 20 minutes. He then stood on Made's toes and appeared to remove something from her scalp. He said it was all that he could to be removed that day, but I felt nothing in his office, and Made felt worse. I did, however, keep repeating a prayer I had been told would help Made. I was uneasy about this Dukun, not least in attending the masjid next to where we were staying. I'd become very friendly with Pa Ustad. But when I learnt that this Dukun wanted $700 to completely protect Made, I realised that, like all Indonesians, on Siliana Bule he became greedy, believing me to be incredibly wealthy, despite assuring him that I no longer was. I was told not to tell Pa Ustad about this village, and when we met, and said that we had been to Puger to buy prawns, which turned out to be Pa Ustad's home desa. Whoever goes to a fortune teller, a soothsayer, or a diviner and believe him, has in fact disbelieved in what has been revealed to Muhammad, attributed to the Prophet Muhammad. I awoke even earlier that night to find Pa Angabaya talking to Cecilio. Cecilio needed to get back to Jakarta for work and was concerned that Pa Angabaya should stick with a single treatment. Privately and unknown to me, Cecilio had picked up on feelings that we were not entirely welcome in the home of Pa Angabaya's daughter. Pa Angabaya seemed troubled, but I wasn't so sure that it was by Cecilio's comments. I proposed an explanation for all that happened, and that the underlying problem being that everyone believed me to be incredibly wealthy. I felt that our long-term problems were created by Muni, who did want our house for costs and was working with Pa RT. Pa and Ibu RT were working against my family and I at the bequest of Pa RT's sister, but most of Made's current problems were from Pa RT's enchantment by Nirarokidal within Made. However, Ibu RT was jealous that her husband had fallen in love with Made and was independently calling Dukun to kill Made. Not only was she hiding this from her family, but also her husband, hence me seeing her doing it so many times along our gang on her mobile. Pa Angabaya appeared to be encouraging me in my prognosis, while at the same time being unconvinced by it, something that I had experienced many times. Pa Angabaya expressed his admiration for the Dukun from Puger, claiming that he was using the most powerful magic that he had ever seen. Despite feeling nothing in his office, I trusted Pak Angerbaya completely and began to realise that the Dukun's lack of questions or advice probably meant that he did indeed have very powerful magic. Either that, or there was another agenda that I was completely unaware of. The Azan called for Fajr, and I said good night to Pak Angerbaya before going to the masjid and then back to bed. A Western education encourages us to see the boundaries between good and bad, life and death, sanity and madness as distinct. I have learnt these to be far from true. The next day, when was the most eventful of my stories so far. When I awoke, I went into the kitchen as Pak Angerbaya's sister made me a coffee, and I looked out of the kitchen door at peace with the world. I spotted a small girl sitting on the ground with her back to a wall, reading a book, but the next moment she was gone. Realising that she was a ghost, I ran to the other door to check if she was still there, but she wasn't. I wanted to talk to her. As I thought about the vision, I speculated that she was reading Al-Quran. All around me were amazed, but not alarmed that a Bulay should have such a vision. Much later, Pak Angerbaya said that he too had seen her when I was at the masjid. Despite initially mistaking the identity of this ghost, I decided to call her Putri, meaning princess, but used as a name for daughter. I'm not sure if it was the vision of the girl or Cecilio's concerns or something entirely else. But Pak Angerbaya had a change of heart and announced that Pa Ustad would return that afternoon and we would then leave for Jakarta. Pak Angerbaya expressed concern that the Puger Dukun had asked for $700, and immediately I understood. He could do no more because his thoughts weren't pure. I explained that the root of our problems was always the fallacy that all Bulays are incredibly rich, and this blatantly was no longer the case with me. You see, this myth is linked to another. The Bulays stole Indonesia's wealth, which can be found locked inside Swiss bank accounts. But for most Indonesians, this is interpreted that I personally own these bank accounts. Despite me having reached this important conclusion, once again Pak Angerbaya seemed distant from it. Although happy with this conclusion, I remain concerned that Made was not completely cured, and Pak RT seemed so persistent. Nevertheless, I was so pleased to see my new friend, Pak Ustad, at the house. He worked with intensity, vigour, but above all, humour and love. First he massaged Maddie's legs and feet, and eventually her toes, pulling out a lot of her malevolence. As I squinted my eyes, I could see a black aura moving around Maddie. When he was convinced that he could do no more, he pushed the remaining malevolence back up Maddie's body and began working on her back, just as I had learned to do, but he seemed to know exactly where to move his hands, often not even touching Maddie. Once he was satisfied that he'd moved all to a shoulder blade, he placed his hand on it and removed the final malevolence. Again, just as I do. Maddie started burping and then spitting out mucus and blood, as she had done so many times, which he neutralised with salt. Pak Ustad encouraged Maddie to burp some more, and eventually removed his petchy hat, pulling out the wind and mucus from her mouth. I squinted once more and found the gases Maddie was exhaling were mustard yellow-green colour. After around 15 minutes they were finished, and Maddie's face lit up. She looked around 10 years younger and appeared to lose around 3 kilograms from her stomach, weight that had accumulated over the previous year. As a finale, Maddie had to eat a live head lice, apparently a cure for many ailments. Cecilio's car left Jember, and I was full of emotions. So happy that it had ended at last, and so sad to be leaving Pak Ustad, the nicest man I had ever met, a man who embodied everything Islam means to me. The most direct route to Jakarta is along the northern coast road, but of course we didn't follow it, zigzagging via Jember, Surabaya in the north and Solo to the south. But I was full of love and happiness and didn't care one bit. We drove through the night and I awoke in Salatiga, where the new Semarang to Solo toll road now ends. Susulio was certainly tired and wanted to book a hotel. We eventually found one in Kundal, of all places, where we collapsed in our beds. When I awoke, it was time for Jumatan in Kendall's huge masjid. I was not aware of any Anak punk rockers who had appeared on my last visit to Kundal in prayer, but maybe their mohawks were covered by kopia, skull caps, and when I got back to the hotel, everybody was ready to leave. Cecilio wanted to buy batik from the market in Pekalongan, as due to the influence of Chinese and Dutch designs, the town is known for its colourful batiks. In recent years, a technical and commercial innovation is to produce colourful batik fabrics as a cottage industry before sending them to large commercial printers for overprinting, with some innovative and some not so innovative designs. But the resultant impressive effect seemed to have taken share from the more traditional batik producers around Solo and Jogja, and now many of the batiks on sale on Malibra originate in Pekalongan. I'm not sure what happened, but I awoke outside a very good batik shop that came recommended by Pak RT, where I bought a lovely batik t-shirt. In fact, I loved it so much, I subsequently bought similar t-shirts for each day of the week. As we drove towards Jakarta, I could feel Pak RT's malevolence once more, and knew that Maddie could feel it too. After going through so many emotions, I was desperately upset. I'd felt strong and wanted to confront our tormentors, insisting that they and not us who should move home. So when Ibu Dayanti told me not to speak to them, I became angry again. The car went silent, partially through embarrassment, but also because all knew, myself included, that these were exactly the emotions I needed to keep in check. Indeed, equanimity is essential in submitting to Allah. Why do I intellectually accept something that I cannot implement behaviourally? It was as though the networks within my brain were imperfect. As soon as I hit an obstacle, I spiralled into anger. I have heard New Wave practitioners claim that it does not take long to learn a new behaviour as it does to accept new beliefs, and it is not uncommon for people to never learn behaviour that they have already intellectualised. We dropped Maddie and Titi off first at their small cost, which, seeing its diminutive size, made me feel very sad, especially when we had a large and comfortable home not 2 kilometres to the south. I was then dropped off at our home, and there in my path was Pak RT. I shouted Semar Mesam at him, to which he asked what I meant. I then called Widati out of the house to point Semar Mesam out to her. I awoke the next morning, feeling strong rather than angry, and refreshed to hear that Pak Ustad from Puger was still working for us, and that all would be sent back to them at the end of the month, a Javanese holiday, which paradoxically coincided with Halloween. I really didn't want to visit Maddie in her cost, despite her wanting me to. It made me sad, and I felt I needed to be in our home, fighting our attackers. Maddie seemed so upset when I refused to come to the cost, and suddenly I had a change of heart, just as Pak Ustad told her I would. But of course, when he said I was strong, he meant that Maddie needed my calming, watery strength. Around 12 months previously, Pak RT had summed up mine and Maddie's relationship, stating that she was from fire and I was water, and that I neutralised her. That evening we went to a lovely bar, reasonably close to the cost, and Maddie was radiant, by far the most beautiful lady in Bar, and probably the oldest. In fact, this was the last time I ever drank alcohol. Not that I knew it at the time, as I would have savoured my beers even more. For some months I divided my time between the Cost and our home. Somehow the neighbourhood around the Cost feels completely different to the kampong our house is in. The Pak RT is an enabler rather than a gatekeeper, as ours is, and everyone seemed empowered rather than driven by fear. Nevertheless, I became aware that Maddie was not unscarred by her experiences and had a degree of memory loss, unable to remember things like PIN numbers, which necessitated numerous visits to her banks. Maddie also kept losing things in the small and untidy Cost, which she had no time to organise, although this hardly explained the large quantity of old bills and small pieces of paper with notes written on them. Halloween was close, and we'd had 3 offers for our house. One from Pak RT, where Maddie's Cost is, who is willing to swap it for the Cost plus cash. I have also learnt that the curtain shop owner from Block M managed to sell our house at a very good price, but the buyer pulled out on advice from their Pak Ustad. After visiting our home only twice, the curtain shop owner fell ill and spent 4 days in hospital. I have also received an offer to buy my office/flat in Manchester. Not enough, but it feels like a massive depression that has engulfed our lives is coming to an end. On one of my returns to the house, I spotted Pak RT, Uni and Bar Annie returning from somewhere. Somehow I knew it was concerning our house. I at first thought the worst, but am now much more positive. One divination was that when our house was set alight during the 1965 riots, Ibu RT's family threw the family gold down the toilet. Maybe this divination is simply allegorical, but it suggests that our house is worth much more than we believe, and we therefore do not need to be rushed into a sale. However much pressure we get from these forces, we don't fully understand. Some 2 years later, after this, Maddie commented that we own 2 homes, but our neighbours appear to be threatened by us, or at least our land titles. I have no idea what the issues are, but unlike our neighbours, we have no intention of forcing our advantage over them. Visiting another Dukun, now the 12th, is a much more likely explanation for our neighbours' collusion, as Maddie is suffering from new but not so troublesome attacks. We had spotted a bottle containing water mixed with soil from graves, but Bar Annie seemed to be dispersing outside our house each morning. My son Branwell has taken to demanding money from me, often at short notice, which is impossible when at Maddie's Cost, or our home in Gunung, and even sometimes difficult from my home in South Jakarta. He claims to have already spent the $45,000 my parents and I left him to fund his life during the university. If this is true, he must be addicted to something, and is kinder for me to stop conceding to his demands. Oh, thank you, Branwell. I now realise that not only are our adversaries addicted to black magic, but so are we. Our every waking hour is dominated by our thinking about our torment, or every physical or mental feeling is attributed to black magic, and all our cash is given over to fighting black magic. But there is also the parallel that, like drugs, black magic exploits our weaknesses and uncertainty, opening them up until we are trapped by our own fears, even addicted to them. Maddie has become emotionally dependent on Pak Ustad from Puger, passing every feeling and thought over to him, when she really needed to fight the attacks and create our own good fortune. Like our own addictions, this is one we have to break, but only then can we once be free. Once again, thank you, Branwell. During one of his outbursts, Branwell claimed that he could stop my problems. Explaining my problems to a schizophrenic son is foolhardy, but believing him to be involved in my problems really is madness. But if his condition is a part of my torment, then maybe I should try to remove it. Is this madness? Maybe, but as my story has unfolded, I have been forced to revise my thinking on so many things. Kiki is Maddie's stepson. In common with most of Brahma's family, he had always held Maddie with contempt. But when Kiki heard that his half-sister, Titi, was also ill, he said he would help. Kiki had received most of Brahma's assets, making him wealthier than me and nearly as wealthy as I ever was, and given his engineering degree from the University of Indonesia, earns as big a salary as I ever have. It was only when I explained to Maddie some years ago that the penny finally dropped that middle-class Bulays are not as wealthy as middle-class Indonesians. I say finally dropped, as few Indonesians, or Brits for that matter, can ever comprehend this, not realising that poverty in Indonesia is about the distribution of wealth more so than a lack of it. Now that around 20% of Indonesians are middle class and therefore have more disposable wealth than people in the West, one can no longer claim that Indonesia is in need of aid from the West. Although this is a point that will never convince an Indonesian about, including its middle class. Indeed, the overall corruption on a society is it to increase the gap between the rich and the poor, as it tilts an already uneven playing field. In Maddie's cost, I began to feel the pains in my neck, rather like those I developed in Thailand, almost exactly 3 years previously. I believe these to be viral meningitis, as a result of my recurring outbreaks of herpes simplex. I resolved to visit the imam from the Shola near our home, but also have become adept at fighting such symptoms. So when they subsided and flu-like symptoms developed, I again thought little of it. On reflection, at Maddie's cost, I kept sleeping on a mattress on the floor with pillows haphazardly thrown at the end of the mattress, so maybe my neck pains are explainable, although they keep recurring with some regularity. Kiki came to our house with his Batari aunt, who had been one of the Dukun Brahma had used in his attempts to get Maddie back. But Brahma later had said that the Dukun was pursuing her own agenda. This aunt did not seem happy with the various jimat Pak RT had placed around our home, which put me immediately on my guard. I trusted her, but Pak RT and Pak Ustad from Puger more so. In fact, I later found that she had removed a number of items, despite me specifically telling her that she was not to. She placed something under our doorstep, breaking the tiles, but I was happy for this to happen, if it helped. The Dukun aunt then asked me to drink sidra, herbal ruqya that I'd been taking anyway, and performed a very vigorous ruqya on me, leaving me with bruises all over my back, whilst calling out random Chinese-sounding words. Tempting though it was to shout out the words to Chinese Ching or Chinese Laundry Blues, Mr. Wu, I refrained, despite, in my experience, George Formby impersonations being a wonderful icebreaker, and particularly when travelling in the Muslim world, just as Norman wisdom is in Muslim Albania. I felt no benefit and simply believed that she was focusing on me. As being a bully, I was an obvious target. Nevertheless, if it helped Maddie, I was prepared to go through anything, a view later reinforced by other family members. Then later, I heard that Maddie had paid the Batawi aunt $175, and it was not Kiki who paid for her. So I realised that something was wrong. But when I returned to Maddie's cost, she explained that my aura had changed, and when Titi returned, I could see the change in her. The aunt had said that she removed 11 ghosts from our home, presumably the souls of 11 people Muni had killed so far, which were bringing us bad luck and ill health. She also said that I had been affected with many spells over a 3-year period, including one designed to kill me, but the majority were aimed at me losing money, which would go to my adversary, Uni. Again, this seemed to explain so much. The extremely painful meningitis-like symptoms, which began in Thailand and accumulated during my house arrest, and my British business partners double-crossing me whilst in Vietnam. After these events, I gave up on seriously looking for work and business, as everything I touched lost me even more money, including not returning to Vietnam, where I was working for the National University. Then there were a chronicle of problems and bad luck which had beset me on leaving the UK and moving to Indonesia, including Branwell's schizophrenia. Of course, my mistakes on the internet almost completely mirror Maddie's recent memory loss and problems with her PIN numbers. As my financial fortunes increased, so did Uni's wealth. Why could black magic attack me when at that stage I didn't believe? Well, I was sad at my personal circumstances and being able to spend all my time with Maddie. As a result, I engaged in many vices, seeking short-term relief from my sorrow. A few days later, what I thought was a sting on my foot became infected, and I recall a similar mark which appeared only a few days after moving into our house. Maybe the Ibu Dukun's prognosis was not complete, and this first mark was more significant. After the first mark on my leg had swollen with fluid, something that only completely relieved some 5 years later by the imam from our local mashola. After this original mark, I succumbed to many ailments, as though the poison was flowing through my body, the description of which my British doctor found incredulous. A similar reaction to my dentist when I had told him that I'd become aware of my teeth. Not really painful, but I could feel them. I wrote this off as my first experience of a tropical disease, the worst I can recall as an adult. Eventually, I developed claw hand and arthritis, which lasted around 6 weeks, but became completely debilitating for 2 days, losing the ability to walk, sit, or even lie still. In Manchester, I remember meeting a friend whilst walking my dog, and he told me that he'd never seen anybody look so ill. This was to repeat itself every spring or hot season in Indonesia since then, make me think that it was chikungunya, but tests in the UK showed no evidence of this. My doctor was even more aghast when I explained that my arthritis was as though my brain was unable to communicate with my legs. I knew I wanted to move my leg, but I simply couldn't. In fact, I had fleetingly considered mad cow disease to be an explanation. I never did mention to her the metal taste I kept getting in my mouth, as I believed it was related to the recurring abscesses and me sucking a metal pen whilst thinking. Although my misfortune has lasted many years, the first few could be explained by normal bad luck one experiences in businesses, especially during a recession. But since moving into our house, it has been overwhelming. Prior to moving, I'd had little luck in Indonesia, but had some very good contacts and a pipeline of business, which under normal circumstances should have come to something. But no project has come off since moving to our house, or if they have, I have lost money on them. Of course, many projects don't come off, and some do lose money, but not all. And certainly there was one project which I couldn't charge for after a software error on the cloud wiped all my clients' data, a fault with a 1 in 2 billion probability. On reflection, I must have lost $1 million, and during all this time, Uni had become wealthy. Indeed, I probably was a dollar millionaire when I first met Maddie, in assets certainly, but Uni now has more wealth than is feasible through polishing pearls. Then a year ago, I gave up completely on seeking business or work, resolving to hold on to what little money I still had. This coincides with when I became aware that Uni and Pak RT started their attempts to kill Maddie, and then me and the rest of my family. Without my flow of misfortune, the spirits Uni had a pact with will require blood, and my family was the obvious target. He undoubtedly realises that if he kills Maddie first, I will be deported, and he can then take our home. But this is just a minor benefit compared with his need to develop blood to nearer Blorong. So that was what Mas Pradipta meant when he said all the energy had gone. The next evening, Kiki came to Maddie's cost with his aunty, who performed Rukia on Maddie and said that she was now clean and that Weedy Yati had never had anything. We bathed in herbal Rukia, and I was assured that any problems I now felt were due to health and not paranormal activities. She told us that Uni and Pak RT had consulted 18 Dukun, not 12, and that the last had used Balinese liak. I realised that Weedy Yati's absence of benevolence was because he doesn't believe in any of it. I just now need to convince Maddie and Titi to do the same. The aunt also insisted that we have a salamatam to clean our house, so in total it cost us $400. When moving around furnishings for the salamatam, I discovered a piece of tinfoil containing soil. I believe the aunt had placed it there to scare us into using her again, as we were meant to believe that it was soil from a grave. But to a Brit, the small tinfoil bundle looked more like cannabis resin. But this would never occur to Indonesians, as its draconian drugs policy mean that crystal meth and heroin are infinitesimally more common than cannabis resin. So I decided to uncover the jimat that the Dukun aunt had secreted in the house and cost, and was horrified to find bundles of needles and nails. Maddie's Dukun brother claimed as these were what killed Prama, which Prama himself had predicted, undoubtedly an attempt to get his smaller house, which he had promised to Titi. Yes, Prama was unloved and uncared for in Jakarta, so returned to his hometown Purworejo, where he was also unloved and uncared for, and died, but not before calling Maddie to say sorry for her years of mistreatment as his wife. I was passing through Purworejo on the night bus when I heard the news of his death, but Maddie didn't want me to pay my respects, not least as unlike Bertrand, I never did meet Prama, and anyway, Titi was on her way with Cecilio. That night, Weedy Yati showed us some pictures of our roof, which included a sacrificed crow and a painting of a tree that had cut down many years previously. It was also the same painting I had seen inside Uni's house. The only person who could have put them there is Mas Pradipta when fixing the roof. So Mas Pradipta is the third man that I dreamt would attack us after all, unless somebody is attempting to frame him by climbing onto our roof and putting them there, presumably in the dead of night to avoid detection. Far-fetched though this seems, access to our roof can be reached from Uni's house, and we later found out the crow was a burung cemani, which would have cost $2,000. Not a year's wages in Jakarta, but nearly. So somebody with money, like Uni, was going to an awful lot of trouble to create mayhem in our lives. Pak Ustad from Puger tells us that the tree which we cut down outside our house was used by Uni to create wealth, but that it needs feeding with human blood every year. Mas Kanchara knew that he was going to die, but never told us why. You see, within the last 40 days of life, Muslims are visited by the Archangel Azrael, or Azrael to Jews and Christians. They must have killed Mas Kanchara just to get Buddha to marry Mas Pradipta, to put a spy in our camp. No wonder every time we believed we had won, it came back to us stronger than ever. With this knowledge, we now have the power over them. Although I lost a little of my power by confronting Uni, and the soil from the grave turned out to be a cleaning fluid, although of course it probably still did contain soil from the grave. Or why would Bar Annie clean the earth outside our home each morning? Indeed, such deception is typical of Uni, who is too clever for his own boots, or being Indonesian, flip-flops. Now they know that we have no money. The only thing they can do is try and kill us all to appease the spirits they deify and take our property, which is exactly what they have been doing over the last few weeks. But we are now strong and will not let this happen. Who really knew the truth all along but was too frightened to act? Of course, Maddie's Dukun brother. Not so clueless after all, but consumed by the same greed as Uni, and having already taken some of my wealth, anything the brother did to Uni would affect him in exactly the same way. Maybe, just maybe, he has learnt his lesson, and we now can become brothers at last, without constantly looking out for his attempts to cheat me. Nah, he's Indonesian. A Javanese leopard cannot change its spots, although he is mistaken for the Javanese tiger. Maddie added an interesting twist to my analysis. It would seem that smiling Uni had befriended her before I moved into our house, and she had already provided him with all the information he needed to attack us, also hinting to him that she knew that he was using Pesugian, a paranormal pact to deliver blood in exchange for money. He had won the confidence of the kampong through smiles and good deeds, and nobody expected that he was killing a kampong resident every year, not least as his targets were an old man, a drug addict, Mas Kanchara, and unborn babies. Maddie also let him know that I had the money and contacts to take out anyone who crossed me. Uni had previously pointed out the problems with our roof. The wind had moved some masonry. Or could it have been Uni who had moved it as he went across our roof to paint the picture of the tree? So all along he had been fearful of us. That we would expose him and the ability to put a stop to him. Of course, Indonesians fear everybody, and especially bullays. So convinced that I would fight fire with fire, Uni is determined to find the knockout blow. But Uni is more fearful of the spirits he has unleashed, which, although rewarding him with money, have often gone far further than he had intended. This probably also explains why Pak RT seems to be working with him, but then also independently and fearful of each other. Despite being frightened of us, we need to be killed, as they are even more fearful of the forces they have unleashed, and their own fates if they break their Pesugian pact. Indeed, most Muslims believe that their actions are so serious they cannot be saved, but I believe Allah to be all forgiving. Well, that concludes this chapter from the Magic Sugar of Java. I do hope you liked it. I'm going to attempt to add another chapter every week. In order for you to be notified about it, please subscribe and hit the bell. In fact, I need subscribers and listeners to reach monetization. And I do want feedback, but I also want to stay true to my experiences. I really want to keep things real. So therefore, I don't want to alter the format too much. But above all, thank you for listening. Thank you so much.